I'm at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh with Jane Werner, who is the executive director of the museum. Jane, I'd like to take a moment for you to share your background and how you ended up in Pittsburgh.
Well, I actually grew up in a really small town in eastern Pennsylvania, and I went to school at Syracuse University, which at the time that I went was just, I don't know, changed my life. I was an art major, and one thing led to the next. Graduated, went to New York like any good, art major, and decided I had enough of that after about a year, and I moved back home when I was invited to come to Pittsburgh by an aunt who I dearly loved, and came out to Pittsburgh to try my luck. And within about a week, I had 3 jobs. I sold luggage at a shopping mall. I was the #1 Samsonite luggage salesperson in all of Pittsburgh. I was editing film at WQED, actually 16mm film, and I was demonstrating graphic arts computer here at the, was then Buell Planetarium. So I would actually drive my little Dodge Dart between these 3 jobs, and the museum job stuck. So, kind of a weird little story about how to, I worked really hard and ended up in the museum.
Well, I think that people here in Pittsburgh are glad that you did. And speaking of which, let's talk about the museum a little bit with a focus on its origin and the mission of the Children's Museum.
Sure. So the origin actually goes back about 40 years. The Junior League of Pittsburgh started it. And we started in the basement of what was the old post office building of Allegheny City. So Pittsburgh was a sister city, had a sister city here on the north side. It was called Allegheny. So the post office is where we started, in the basement. And then about 1990 something, they moved up to the 2nd floor and eventually took over all 3 floors. Pittsburgh History and Landmarks actually saved that building from destruction. So Pittsburgh History and Landmarks gave it to the museum, and then one thing led to the next, and we took over the Buell Planetarium and built the building in between in 2004. We did the park out front in 2012, and then in 2019 we opened the Museum Lab. So it's been kind of 40 years of amazing growth. So yeah, that's the story of the Children's Museum.
So even coming up on the elevator today, and you were talking about water play and labs and whatnot.
Yeah.
What are some of the primary features here that people might come to the Children's Museum and enjoy?
Well, the mission of the Children's Museum is to provide innovative and inclusive museum experiences that inspire creativity, curiosity, kindness, and joy. So you can kind of tell that it's not just focused on children. We actually hope the whole family finds something to do here that kind of makes them joyful, makes them more creative, makes them more curious. So, we have areas where the studio is all open access to art materials, where you can pull a silk screen or do a clay piece. In Make Shop, it's all about tinkering and doing things like building circuits, and we actually have a 3D printer in there, but there's also things like soldering. So, we kind of doing those, and weaving. How could I forget weaving? Which is huge. And then we have exhibition spaces. We have our kindness gallery. We have the garage, which is just filled to the brim with stuff. It's in the old planetarium space. We have a traveling exhibit program. We have the nursery for our very youngest child. And then on the 3rd floor, we have water play, which is, you should bring a swimsuit. I mean, you will get wet. And then the Museum Lab is all about for older kids. And there's a school that the kids come every day to the Children's Museum. And what we're looking at in the Museum Lab, we know education isn't quite working. And the informal space is a space where, like a museum, is a space that we can actually experiment, where Schools can't do those things. Like, we can take chances. No one ever fails a museum. So we can do the things that schools can't. We can try things out. And this actually works. We did it with our makerspace. Our makerspace, we have a Department of Learning and Research, and they have actually shown how kids learn in spaces where you can get your hands dirty and do all the things that you do with Tinker Toys, right? Like, build things. And what we're finding is that it's the stuff that teachers and students crave in schools, like making things visible, not just digital, but really actually doing the work. And we have put maker spaces in over 300 spaces throughout the country. No one knows this, but we worked with Google, we worked with Kickstarter, and we got all of these spaces into schools, hospitals, even Western Psych has a maker space because of the kind of not only the educational but also the emotional growth and health of people is kind of dependent on making things in some ways.
Well, I'm pretty excited because we wouldn't be sitting here today if we hadn't put together the podcast Boy Toys on my Out of Place podcast series. And that particular one, of course, covers building sets for children in the 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. The story of my brother Carl and myself working with those toys. But I wanted to talk to you today about the idea of development of how those particular toys were used for our development mechanically, and it worked out pretty well for us. But for example, today I do get the impression that hands-on activities have largely given way to virtual ones. And I want to know, is that really a true statement? Is that something that you're finding? And what are the impacts of these virtual toys?
Yeah, I think that is true. I think that the digital world is so fascinating to kids as well as adults. I think that phones are self-soothing. Like, it doesn't require a lot of you, right? And I think that what we're finding is that when kids come into the Children's Museum, you know, we see 5-year-olds who don't know how to use the scissors. Mm. And I'm becoming more and more aware of the fact that the physical world is playing less and less of a role in children's play. And I think developmentally that will do something. I'm not sure. You know, from our perspective, we think that balance is really important in a child's life. And I don't think that you can just say no digital, but I also think you can't say all digital. I think there has to be some kind of balance. And making things is just very, I don't know. When you make something, you're very proud of it. I think it's a developmental thing. I always say that I would never be an executive director of a children's museum if I hadn't learned to sew at an early age, because I knew I could change my world. You know, I could actually take something and take fabric and a pattern and make it three-dimensional, and I could wear it, and I could be really exciting, and I could change something in my world.
I think that's outstanding, and I can somewhat identify with that whole idea of making something and feeling that accomplishment. But do you think that kids are developmentally different today than, say, my generation, your generation? And I guess the essence of it is, do you think they're growing up faster?
They're growing up differently. I'll say that. I don't know if it's faster, it's differently. I do think that kids still need the same thing that they've always needed. They need caring adults in their lives to play with them, to watch them, to protect them, to, you know, just love them how they are. And I think sometimes we're not quite giving as much time as maybe our parents did to kind of nurturing whatever your interests are.
I think that's interesting, because the next question I was going to ask you was about engagement, but you've kind of covered that already. just staying more involved.
Yeah, more involved, getting out in the world. You know, I find kind of kids don't have a perception of how big the world is and how varied it is. And, I just think exposing kids to everything is really important so that they can find their way. They can try on identities. They can say, am I this? Am I this? Am I, who am I? And you try those things on through play. And by having a lot of different play opportunities, and a lot of different access to materials, and to just even meeting different people, I think you actually, your life becomes richer. And I'm much more interested in leading a fruitful life than I am in necessarily a financially successful life. I think we don't talk enough about living a fruitful life.
Well, it's going to be a moment here that I'm going to ask you to look into the future. Kind of tell us where you think that the world of play is headed right now. And do you think that AI is going to play a big role in all of that?
You're going to ask me that now?
I'm asking you right now.
A small little question. Oh my. I think play is different. I think we're trying to understand it here at the Children's Museum because we're trying to understand with our learning and research department how kids play now. We're trying to understand the role of technology. There's a little part of me that always thinks that when people zig, we zag. So all of education is going towards AI. We're going to go back to like the basics. We're going to go back to use of hands. Technology that actually brings people together rather than isolating people. We're kind of interested in that. And at some point, the pendulum swings way far in all directions, even in education. You can just feel that it's going to swing back to like getting kids outside, getting unstructured play going, getting, being able to make up rules, play with each other, understand that it's not winners take all the time. I don't know. Like you can collaborate, and I think that's important to be a successful adult.
Well, you once again got ahead of me on questions because that was the next question I was going to
before.
ask. So it was kind of that way, just kind of looking at what you're doing at the Children's Museum, and it sounds like a lot of hands-on kind of activities.
Yeah, AI is interesting. It's not that interesting, and it gets things wrong, and I worry about the creativity part of it. It kind of, it can be helpful for some things. I just think we have to understand what it's good at and what it's not good at.
Well, I have to tell you that in coming here today, I was really excited about it. We came to your gala a couple months ago, and I turned to my wife and Adina and said, "We've got to interview Jane. We got to find a way to get here and interview Jane," and we've accomplished that goal. So I'm really happy about that.
Thanks, Rex.
But we've talked a lot about what you do here, and even coming in here, seeing some of the folks down at the beginning. Who should people contact? Do you have volunteers that come in, and do you welcome them to help out with different things? And who should they contact? How should they get involved?
Yeah, it's interesting. We actually have a wonderful volunteer board, and we also have committees of the board where people get involved. I would say that we don't have a volunteer program where people can come in and help out. It's something we've talked about doing for years. We do have paid staff because what we found with volunteers when we did have a volunteer program is that sometimes life intervened and it was easy for volunteers to say, can't come in. And when you're dealing with the age of children that we are dealing with, we really wanted that kind of consistency to make sure that somebody was here. So we went to an all-paid staff. But we have talked for years about kind of getting the volunteer program up and running again. So they can just call me. I'm here. So,
Okay.
and I can put them in touch with our HR.
And people that want to make donations, can they do
yeah.
that on?
Yeah,
They can do that on your
yes,
site. I take it?
online. Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
That is
great.
lovely.
Okay. Well, this is your opportunity. If you have some upcoming programs you want to talk about, maybe.
Sure. So, one of the things we are very proud of, we actually have, and something that I was lucky enough to have as a mentor is Fred Rogers, and worked for Fred on an exhibit together. Got to know the whole company really well, and we are now partnering with a new Fred Rogers company, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. We did an exhibit with them a couple of years ago, traveling exhibit, and we just received a large grant from the Eli Lilly endowments to do not only another traveling exhibit on kind of the Fred Rogers universe, so we're going to include Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, and Don Quixote, and create a traveling exhibit and a permanent exhibit here. So that's pretty exciting. We just opened a redo of the backyard where we installed Lozzie Worm, which used to be at the Carnegie. It's a wonderful climbing structure. That's part of a bigger plan to do a public art park all the way in front of the museum, and now we're talking about even extending it down towards the Warhol. So it'll be like this really interesting art walk. And what else are we doing? It just goes on and on and on. We build all of our exhibits in-house, which is unusual these days. So that's been exciting, and we are in the process of rethinking the nursery. We're going to rebuild that, and then we have Tough Art, which is now it's an international program. For 20 years, we've been inviting 3 to 4 artists in every summer, and they are taught by our staff how to toughen up their artwork, because artists would come in with like the most wonderful thing, and within, 3 minutes, it would be completely destroyed.
Right.
So this is all like, can you make your art tough enough to hold up to a 5-year-old? And that has become a huge program for us. We were just commissioned by the Cultural Trust to do a piece, one of our artists to do a piece down at Arts Landing. We're working with River Life on their landing right down here. And shockingly, the Carnegie International is taking one of their artists who's going through the Tough Art program right now with us. So a piece, the International, will be a Tough Art program. So we think that this has like real, could be catalytic to how we think about public art going forward. And who would have thought the Children's Museum, right?
No.
So that's the kind of stuff we do.
Well, thank you very much
Yeah,
for today. It was
thank
a
you.
real pleasure. I'm just delighted that we got this chance to sit down and talk, and thank you very much for agreeing to do it.
No, this is fun.
So good luck with all your endeavors here.
Thanks, come visit. Okay.
We'll be back.
All right.
Okay,
Sounds
thank
good.
you.